Welcome to Macon Memories. I'm Linda Wright at Randolph-Macon College. Today is July 19th, 2023, and I am here today with Alana Davis, Registrar at the college, who is leaving the college after over 20 years as work in the Registrar's office. And welcome, Alana.
Thank you.
So to get started, can you tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, your education, and how you came to Randolph-Macon?
Absolutely. So I grew up in Newport News, Virginia, and have lived in Virginia almost all of my life. So I grew up in Newport News, and I attended the College of William & Mary for my undergraduate degree. When I graduated from college, I knew that I wanted to work in higher education because my mother had worked in career services for graduate business students at William & Mary in my childhood, but I didn't know what exactly I wanted to do in education. My husband had graduated several years before that from the Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah, Georgia, and we decided that when I graduated college, he wasn't my husband yet, but was going to become, we would move to Savannah, and I would apply for jobs at SCAD and do whatever it was I could be hired doing in higher education. As with most people who start in higher ed, for me, that happened in the admissions office. And so I worked in the Savannah College of Art and Design admissions office for 2 years, first as an admissions counselor and then evaluating admission applicants. They structure theirs a little bit differently there. Before we made the decision to move back up here to the Richmond area. When we did that, I applied for jobs that were open. Randolph-Macon happened to be hiring, and I came to Randolph-Macon and actually started here in the admissions office in 2003. So August of 2003 was my hire here at Randolph-Macon, and I spent 2 years in the admission office there. So that is how everything started for me. My educational experience continued beyond that. While I was employed here at Randolph-Macon, from 2005 to 2010, I pursued a Master of Arts degree in literature, English literature, at VCU. And then in 2015, I began a doctoral degree back at William & Mary in higher education policy planning and leadership. And I am nearly finished with that in the final dissertation stages. I'm writing the last couple chapters of my dissertation and will hopefully defend that within the next couple of months. So that's my own educational background as well.
That's wonderful. So you started in admissions 2003 to 2005, and the admissions director at that time was?
So the director of admissions was Stephen Nape, and the dean of admissions and financial aid was John Conkright. So I worked with John Conkright. I worked with Stephen. When I started in admissions there, Annie Keith, who is still employed here at the college as the director of new student orientation and transition programs, was in the admissions office there, as were a couple folks who are also still in admissions. Debbie Napier, who is kind of the data entry person over there, and then Donna Flournoy started not long after I did, and the two of them are both still in admission operation work. But Annie is still here. She's somebody that I met on my interview. And then Anthony Ambrogi, who I worked with for many years when he was the director of admissions here too, was part of that experience. So, yeah.
That's great. I did, just for the record, interview John Conkright in one of the Macon Memories interviews. Mm-hmm. I believe he was paired with Ed Cox, who had been the head of admissions years before,
okay.
And so they talked about admissions things among others.
I really valued my relationship with John. He was great. So he hired me in admissions, was very supportive of my transition to the registrar's office when that happened, was part of the search committee when I was hired as registrar, so was involved in that process. And for a short period of time, I was staff rep, or for the 2-year term that those run, I was staff rep here at the college. And when I did that, we had monthly meetings in the president's office, and I was always in that meeting with John as well. Mm-hmm. So we had a really good relationship in the time that he was here. I really enjoyed working with him. Yeah.
Right, nice man. Okay. So speaking of the transition to the registrar's office, that sounds like that was around 2005.
It was.
So how did that appeal to you? You were in admissions, what?
I was in missions for about 2 years. So I transitioned to the registrar's office in May of 2005. My area in admissions had, while I'd had travel territories and some other things, my specialization had been with the special populations of students. So I worked with international students and I worked with transfer students very extensively. In the course of doing transfer student admissions, I got to know the folks in the registrar's office because we were working on transfer credit evaluations and how to communicate with the incoming transfer students. I knew that my skill set was in admissions. I was not bad at what I was doing, but it wasn't what made me happy, and I didn't think it was my great area. It wasn't maximizing the strengths that I thought I could bring to Randolph-Macon. And so when it was Bethany Gerber, who had been the assistant registrar at the time, when she moved and that position opened, I applied to it at the encouragement of Marilyn Gibbs. At the time, she was the registrar at the time, and we had developed a pretty good relationship. And I applied for that position and was hired to transition across campus. And it was exciting because I had been working with that population of transfer students in the admission process, and then my first responsibility in the registrar's office was to do transfer credit evaluations. So I had this set of students that I already knew to begin working with as they transitioned to the college. I worked with their transfer student advisor, who that year was Greg Doherty. And so he was the first faculty member that I established a really close relationship with, and one that's continued. He came and visited me the other day. We were pretty close to Greg, and it started because of that work. And kind of happened that way.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Well, it does sound like that was really using your skill set. So you're very detail-oriented and
Yes.
Policy-oriented.
Yes, I like detail and I like policy, and I like how that helps to shape the student experience overall and serve the mission of the institution.
Well, let's talk about the curriculum for just a little bit. Okay, so we are now in what we're calling Curriculum 21.
Yep.
Because it began in the fall of 21.
Uh-huh.
And but the curriculum's transformed several times since 2005 when you joined the registrar's office. When I first came in 2005, we were in what they call the new curriculum.
We had just started the new curriculum. So when I transitioned to the registrar's office in May of 2005, they were finishing the last academic year of the curriculum that had been in place for years. They had just finished their curriculum review process and were going full force into starting the first year experience in the fall of 2005. So my first summer and then fall semesters in the registrar's office began with the onset of what we called the new curriculum, which is what I think of now as the AOK curriculum, the Areas of Knowledge curriculum. So while I have read the other one and I have evaluated a few degrees, based on the former one for people who were lingering over time, the one that I really started with and the one that I knew the best was the AOK curriculum. It really started with my first year, coincided with my first year in the registrar's office. So, and one of my first responsibilities was to make first semester schedules for freshmen. That was before we had on-campus registration days and things like that. They filled out course preference forms, and I actually did the full schedule for all incoming students. And so I had to know that curriculum really well. Then when Marilyn Gibbs retired in 2008, she worked through commencement that year, commencement of 2008, which was the last graduating class under the prior curriculum. And so I began as registrar in really July 1st, 2008. And so the 2009 commencement ceremony, which was the first year of students graduating under the AOK curriculum, was also my first commencement. And so I basically have been here for the AOK curriculum. And then we transitioned, we engaged in another curriculum review process, which in higher ed, I think everybody knows, takes a long time. And several years ago established what is now known as Curriculum 21, that redesigned the curriculum. We no longer have distribution requirements. We have what are called pillar requirements that are focused in general kind of knowledge areas like aesthetic expression, human condition, civic life, and there's 6 of them. And courses in any program can fit any pillar. So if you think of religious studies courses, you might have courses like Religion and the Founding Fathers, like Hal Breitenberg teaches a course on that. That would make sense as a civic life course, right? Where you will have Bible as film or film in the Bible, which might make sense as aesthetic expression. You might have the Hinduism course, which may make sense as global experiences because you're learning about the cultures as a component of religion. And then you might also have Women in Christianity, which is really going to be thinking about humanity as part of that, so it could apply to human condition. So it really broke out of, and that's just one example, you can see this in a lot of departments, it really broke out of the distribution requirement framework and transitioned it to a more broad conceptual framework. It made it a little more difficult to manage on the bookkeeping side of things because your brain can't say the history requirement is filled with history courses and the religious studies and philosophy requirement is filled with religious studies and philosophy courses. But pedagogically and the kind of education it can provide to students it's fantastic, right? So that began with the class of the students enrolling at the college in 2021. So it took a little while to set that up, to develop degree audits for them, to have courses certified for these new requirements. But we were bringing students in to start beginning that curriculum in 2021. We did also allow students the opportunity to change to that curriculum if they chose to. So I have graduated students, I would say maybe 30, 40, probably more than that, I'm just guessing, students under that curriculum as well. This year, so the 2024 graduates will be the last students under the AOK curriculum, and then everybody will then be on curriculum 21 at that point. And so curricular change is it's an exciting thing. It is a headache and a half to relearn things, right? But a headache that's worth it, I think, in the long run. And I think that our students really benefit from thinking. Students really struggle with requirements and boxes, right? They want to take the things they have to take. And it's difficult to break them out of that mindset and into the mindset of learning because there's all these things out there that you can learn and there's the information is valuable. And so you still have to check the boxes, but trying to change what those boxes look like, I think, was part of how they approached this curriculum kind of redesign. And I was part of that redesign, but my role as an administrator is typically logistical. So I was on the curriculum review committee. I'm on the general education committee. I've been on the curriculum committee since I've been the registrar. I actually filled in for Marilyn when she had knee surgery, so even before I was registrar. And my role is not to comment on the value of a program or what should make sense pedagogically, but more the logistical, structural, feasibility, compliance side of things. And I think that I respect that role, which means I've had a good relationship with the faculty when it comes to managing the curriculum. Sometimes I have to keep us on the rails, and when that happens, folks are typically responsive to that because I'm not spending a lot of my time saying, oh, and also you're doing this wrong pedagogically, because that's not where my role is. I mean, there's times where after having done it for 15 years, I know what our folks are concerned about and I know what they're looking for, so I can mention something from time to time, but really only because I've been doing it for so long. Most of my, of like curricular content, but most of my involvement is on the structural and implementation side.
Mm-hmm. Do you see any trends in the curriculum as it's evolved from the AOK? The AOK, I love that acronym. They check the boxes. Now, with the new curriculum, you said it sort of broke that open, and they have pillars, and it can be from any potentially from potentially
with some limitations, but yes,
but
potentially from any major.
it's what opens it up creatively for the faculty to think about new ways of teaching,
Absolutely,
or new ways of structuring courses. The students that, as an advisor, the students, like you said, they want to see the box and know, I've done that, okay, X, X. And with the pillars, they don't always get to check those boxes until later in the process. And that causes some anxiety,
I think requirements in general cause anxiety for students.
Right.
And you can't, I don't think that there's a magic solution to that. I think this curriculum, first of all, was designed to be a little smaller because the AOK curriculum was quite large. It was far more than a third of their educational experience. If you think about a traditional liberal arts as being a third general education, a third major, and a third elective, it was much closer to like 50% general education.
Yes.
This is smaller, but it is confusing still because of the layers of requirements for students and for tracking. So they still find it a little bit stressful. If I'd had purely from a logistics way, I would have done things differently, but it wouldn't have achieved the same values. For example, the requirement that only one course from your major can fill a pillar requirement. That is a rule in the curriculum. Because we can't read students' minds and know if they're going to want to use their major course to fill the aesthetic expression or the civic life if they've got 2 courses in their major. We had to create a degree audit where they have those potential pillar courses, and then they don't actually check the boxes until they fill out a form. It's an extra step. But so would my life have been better had we not had that extra step in there? Would it be less confusing to students if we didn't have that extra step in there? Yes. Would it have served the purpose of the curriculum for them to fill every pillar requirement with religious studies courses? No, because they're getting no breadth across the curriculum there. So you're still breaking apart the distribution requirements, but you still want them to experience a range of areas. And some students they'll focus so narrowly. But I also think that we implemented, not knowing in advance when we adopted it, that it would be the timing would coincide with the exhaustion of COVID and with strains on some academic resources and things like that. So folks have also not been as excited about creating new courses as they can in some ways. It became much more of a, how can I retool this course that I'm already teaching to meet these needs? And some folks are doing some really interesting things as they approach that. Scott London happens to be on the curriculum committee, or was. He just finished his term, but and he teaches sociology and anthropology courses, and had an upper-level anthropology course that he decided to retool to fill the communication and context requirement, which has some specific criteria for learning how to communicate within a discipline, and has requirements of iterative feedback and opportunities for improvement and some things like that. And I know in some meetings he talked about how he hadn't intended that course to be that requirement, but retooling it had made it a better course. And he enjoyed the result of it and what he was seeing happen with his students. He enjoyed the experience of teaching it. And so I'm hoping that folks are seeing some of that excitement as they're approaching the courses. I think it's also difficult when you're teaching two curricula at one time. I mean, our advisors, many of them are still advising so heavily on the AOK because they're focusing on graduation. I think after this year, when folks can reset their brains to be strictly on the pillar curriculum, it'll be different for folks. I think that just happens in a transition period. And when we transitioned from the old to the new in 2005, they were still pretty similar. I mean, we had a first-year experience course, and we had, they added the cars, but really it was still a distribution-style curriculum.
Right. And I do want to talk about COVID in a few minutes but I don't want to leave this topic quite yet. But I think as time goes on, and you're right, in sort of the exhaustion of all of the COVID crisis, people start to heal and get restored.
I think you're right.
And the students coming on aren't traumatized
in the same ways.
Yes. So, right. I think all of that will.
I think that's true. And I also think that I think that we built in some things in this curriculum to require more continuous assessment. I think by having a general education committee, by having an assessment plan from day one where they're already looking at things, I think they'll also be able to do more in the moment tweaking of the curriculum to make sure it's continuing to meet goals, as opposed to having to wait 15 years for a full scale rehaul and for that to be a painful process and that sort of thing. I think that when you can retool things in the moment with information, not just, on a whim, but kind of in an informed way, it also helps people stay energized because they don't feel like they're working towards a non-existent goal.
Mm-hmm. So the
or a non-achievable goal, I guess. Yeah.
So the assessment piece has been important.
I think so. I mean, they're just starting that process now. They're just collecting and doing initial reviews and that sort of thing. But just even getting folks in the mindset of needing to submit assignments to be assessed, it keeps people thinking about what requirements their courses meet, as opposed to forgetting 2.5 years down the road and your course adapts, but you forgot what goals you were aiming towards. Yeah. I think it keeps those things top of mind.
Yeah, that's good. Well, another recent change in the college, in the last 4 years, we've added 2 health science programs that are new, the nursing program, and just this past year, a physician's assistant program, which is our first graduate program in 100 years or so. So do you want to talk about the impact of those changes on the college and your office in particular?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's hard to say yet the impact of the changes on the physician's assistant program on the college, just because it's still in its first couple of semesters. But the nursing program, I mean, we can certainly say that they've brought in some incredible students. Their students have been active members of the campus community. The faculty members have been engaged in whether it's faculty governance or committee structure. I mean, I know that I've gotten to know Laura Vazel, for example, who is one of the senior members of the nursing department, because she sits on the study travel course committee, which approves J-term travel courses.
Awesome.
And so do I. And she advises new students every year, and last year she happened to advise non-nursing students. She just served as a general advisor. So they're engaging in the campus community as faculty in a way that encourages, I think, their student engagement as well, which has been, I think, really rewarding to see, because that's what you hope is going to happen when you bring on a new program like this. The students tend to be pretty high achieving, and so they're also doing well in the classroom, and they tend to retain well, because they're engaged in a program. I was involved in the nursing advisory board and the thinking through what a nursing curriculum would look like here and how to, connect it with the liberal arts. Of course, we used a consultant for that. And then there was a team of faculty and a couple of administrators who were looking through things and ensuring that so some of our academic policies can't apply to nursing students because they have more strict policy, not less strict. So where a passing grade for us to move on to the next course is a D, in most cases, if it's a nursing course, they have to have a C, because they can't, not even a C minus, but a C, to move forward in their program. And we count C minuses on majors here, and that can't happen in nursing. So we had to kind of look through all of our policies and see what had to be realigned and make sure they work. We tried doing all of that, of course, before the program started, and then you have to reassess as you go, because you're like, well, that doesn't actually work the way I thought it was going to, and I don't know if this is making sense. And so thankfully, that's been a really positive relationship. The nice thing about the curriculum is it's prescribed, so they are real easy to certify for graduation.
Right.
You have to look at their gen ed stuff, but the nursing part, as long as they go right down a checklist. You don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
So that part was easy. And they do a lot of really good communication in the nursing program. But it's been really exciting to see that. And it's been really exciting to see how other departments have grown to support the nursing curriculum. Most notably, of course, would be biology, because they just have to offer so much coursework to support the nursing program. But it's interesting to see, that interplay, that's been done pretty successfully. It's also cool to see how it's inspired courses in other programs. The modern languages is always thinking about ways to remain relevant, right, to students who don't necessarily want to pursue language study. And they have a course on Spanish for medical professionals. We have a number of students who either do biology majors or do nursing who minor in Spanish or do a double major in Spanish. It tends to be pretty common. Not everybody, but it's a relatively common overlap. So thinking about that need, right, and how we can support those students, you can see, or in history, Anne Throckmorton's developed a course called History of Western Medicine. And she, I think, wants to do a history of Eastern medicine too, or they want to have one that might be Dwyn's, because that's kind of her expertise, but have those in the department. And those are going to be courses, they meet like the human condition. It meets the human condition requirement. So general education courses appeal not just to nursing students, but may also be of real interest to students who are interested in going into nursing or other healthcare environments. Same is true in
They did a communications one, did they?
there's a communication in healthcare. Ted Shekels developed that. There's a health psychology class that we've had, but is really appealing to the students. And then thinking about, of course, also the lifespan development course where they have to do that in psychology. And so, kind of seeing departments. It's not necessarily in service of a program. Those things aren't required for those students, but being inspired by that has been pretty exciting. And as far as the impact on our office, it was just learning a new program, right? Like we do that. I had to order a new type of diploma, like whatever. We can do that sort of thing. Like we can make that work. We have new majors that happen, relatively regularly enough. We can incorporate that in. The establishment of the PA program was very different. We didn't have a graduate program. We had to establish graduate regulations. They had to come up with, what does it mean to, who can withdraw from a program? What does their grade system look like? What does it look like if they have a dismissal from their program? What do those regulations look like? How does that work with our office? I read every policy they had, whether they applied to academic affairs or not, and gave feedback, in part because I read a lot of policies, and so I know how to read them like a student. I've spent a lot of time answering questions from students. So things that feel self-explanatory to us who are writing them is not always obvious to students. And so I was trying to anticipate what kinds of questions a student would ask, and could you enforce this policy based on those questions? And so there was a lot of back and forth in refining policy. Most of the ones I gave feedback on were academic, of course, but I'm on their policy and procedures committee, and so I also looked at their social media policy and who can be friends with whom and when are they required to respond to things. Well, they have to, because they're in clinical sites and things like that. And I read it like, and then what would your answer be to this question, and where is that in the policy? Like kind of thing, because I was just like, I can anticipate this. And you might think that question's never going to come, but let me tell you, it will. And so we had some really good feedback with that and some really good processes. They have dismissed their first student now, so it was nice to see that play out. Well, they didn't dismiss. I apologize. There was a student resignation. It was not a They call it resignation there, but it's the equivalent of an undergraduate withdrawal. Yes, a student voluntarily withdrew. I misspoke there. And so, but we had set everything up, so now we knew how to do it. One of the challenges of that has been that they have a completely different academic calendar. Their school year starts in January, as opposed to in a traditional academic year, and they have 4 terms, and it's not technically a quarter system, it's still a semester hour, but with 4 terms. And it's so establishing how that works with federal reporting, institutional reporting, what we say our head count is at a given moment, how we include students who are starting mid-year, how it works with reporting for financial aid and federal purposes, for certifying students who receive veterans benefits, all of these different things we had to work through with financial aid, with billing, with institutional research, who submits a lot of our data reports, things like that.
And I'm sure you're still working through it as you're
we're in the
year.
first year. We talked a lot about whether or not we thought we would have to have another person, to be able to manage that and that sort of thing. And with one graduate program, I think we knew pretty well that the heavy lifting would be on the front end, and limited in our maintenance. We have to do very little to help maintain that program, much less than we do with the other undergraduate program. They don't need to track degree requirements because they literally have no flexibility. They take exactly what they are put into at any given moment. We can actually register them for an entire year in advance.
Yes.
All of those things, I don't even certify them to graduate. They certify it and notify our office that they have met requirements. So we're much more of a record-keeping office, with the exception of facilitating on that policies and procedures and being part of some of that decision-making. So it was a lot of work in the beginning, and now we're in a tweaking period, and then ideally it gets to a point where it's just kind of smooth sailing to support that program. A registrar's office should, I think, feel like we're operating behind the scenes.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't know what registrars do. They don't know what the registrar's office is responsible for, and I think that's means sometimes that we're doing it right because we're involved in a lot of stuff, and it shouldn't feel that way because it should feel like it works.
Right. It is the sort of a foundational.
I always think of it where I always call us the academic hub, or the hub of the academic program. The operations of our academic program doesn't work if our office is not functioning appropriately. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, what I was going to say next, I think you just segued right into that the registrar's office provides the foundational work at the college, the building blocks of the curriculum, and creating a structure that the courses can be plugged into, where the students can enroll, and you are a repository of student records and provide a checklist for students to track their progress and all of that. But the point of all of it is the teaching and learning that happens in the courses. So thought we could take a step back away from the nitty-gritty of the curriculum and that kind of thing and talk about the big picture role of the registrar and your work with students and seeing them through and all
I
of
think
that.
some of that depends on who's in our registrar's office. I mean, there are registrar's offices that are very functional, that their role, they don't engage with students very much, and that their role is, we just do the things we have to do to make the program work, right? Because we're not teaching, we're not we are, I do a lot of decision making. We're not creating the content and that sort of thing. But, in part because we're a small institution, and especially before we had an Office of Advising Resources, Linnea Winston coming on board has changed some of the work we have to do in our office substantially. Some of the student support work that's being done in the HAC now has changed some of the work substantially, but we still are really engaged in that. We've always served as secondary advisors to students. And again, that's something we're pulling away from some, but we do it a lot for faculty. We're kind of advisors for faculty. We answer a lot of questions for faculty, which is good. Like, if I didn't know how every part of our curriculum worked, I'd be bad at my job as registrar. How do I certify students to graduate if I don't know what counts for what and how to make it work and how to do these things, right? And so it's good that we can provide that. You need to know it for your 20 students. I need to know it for everybody. And so I think we've set up a good system with that, and we have good folks in the office. Although we've had some changes in there too, we have good folks in the office who can really support that. I think we do care, though, a lot about students, and I know that for me personally, and I can't speak for everybody who works in my office, but for me personally, it's not the work of the registrar's office that matters. It's students graduating from our institution. It's students learning. It is students becoming. So for me, the reason I come to work every day is because I think education matters. I think it matters to be excited about all the things that we can learn, right? And all of the information that's available to us. I want to know as much as I can about everything in the world. I think it is endlessly awesome that every person that I know on campus is an expert in something niche and wild. And if you have a question about something and the way that it works in the world, you have somebody to ask, right? Like, that's really cool. I remember when they found like the Higgs boson thing, it was like a physics discovery, right? And Bill Franz was provost at the time. And I went to his office and I was like, can you please explain this scientific discovery to me? Because I don't understand. And he did, and it was really cool. Or there'll be a Supreme Court decision and I'll be like, Lauren, can you please explain to me how the Supreme Court got here from this? Like, I can read the news and I know what I think about it, but like when they're talking about legal argument, what are they talking about? Or Steve Lang, I read about this economic thing and that is my Achilles heel. So can you please explain conceptually what this means to me, right? Like, that's awesome. I could sit and listen, and I am not a person of faith, but I could sit and have Hal Breitenberg explain to me the connections of religion and like the religion in America kind of stuff all day long. Like, it is fascinating to listen to him do this. And I love it. I love being in that environment. And I love that we are in a place where we can help students be excited about the same thing, right? But I also really love student development. And I think for me personally, that's where I see the role of the registrar's office supporting students. We're a vehicle for them to have that academic engagement, but we are part of the other development, whether that is understanding accountability, whether that's understanding that it's actually okay to not be perfect, whether that is learning problem solving and talking through what your worst case scenario can be so that you can prepare for that and then manage all the scenarios that come along. I see it as one of my goals as registrar is to help students go through that process, right? So I process academic standing. So I do probation and separation. I now do that much more in conjunction with the folks in the Higgins Academic Center. So I still do the mechanics of it. I still send the letters. They do some of the meetings, but I have always sat with students. I've sat with students my entire career here, where I said, okay, so you're gonna be separated because you received LF in this semester. I cannot do anything about that. That is the rule. I am sorry. Actually, I often don't say I'm sorry because there's nothing I can do about it. Like, you did that, right? But I can say this doesn't have to be the end of your experience. Right. I graduate students every year who've been separated for academic deficiency. So let's sit down and say, so this is what happened. I can't make you feel better. It's gonna suck. You're gonna feel terrible. And then you're gonna decide you wanna change something. And then when you do, we're gonna sit down, or we're gonna sit down now and you're gonna go through and do this, and you're gonna take some classes and you're gonna apply for readmission. And then when you come back here, it's gonna look like this, and these are the things you can work on. And to just move them through that process. They're not always ready to hear it. Sometimes they're very angry with me. I have been yelled at. I have been screamed at. I have been told that I am unfeeling and I don't care about students and I have no empathy for their experience. And in some ways that's true, right? Like, I can't, it's not true. I care very much. But like, I can't change a policy or have a policy not exist because I care. Right. We have academic standards, we have academic rigor, things have to go through. But I care very much about student success. And my best relationships with students are with students who have struggled at Randolph-Macon. I have a student who I met in admissions. When I was in admissions, I had a student who applied who had all Fs on his most recent transcript and legal charges. And I was like, well, I cannot admit you because you have all Fs on your most recent transcript. So let's talk through this. And he really wanted to come here. And I said, you go and you do something to make this better. And I will, and he had some explanation for the legal charges. Like, I wasn't worried about bringing the student into our experience, or into our community. And then he did it. He went somewhere else and he had excellent grades. And I went to bat for him in admissions. That was when I was still in admissions. So he would have applied in my first year. I would have said no. He would have applied in my second year. I went to bat for him. We said yes. And then he transitioned with me, right, to when I was in the registrar's office. So I got to watch him the next few years. He graduated from here cum laude.
Awesome.
He did an internship with Eric Cantor at the time. He graduated from here in 2006. He is the only student, or he for years was the only, I hooded a student this year, but he's the first student I hooded in a commencement ceremony. He asked me to hood him as his sponsor. He met Trevor, my husband, at that point. He's from Atlanta. The student, he was a permanent resident in the United States. He was a Mexican citizen, and his parents were Mexican and Indian. So his dad's from India, and his mom was from Mexico, and he was a permanent resident, lived in Atlanta. And over the course of the last, it's almost 20 years now. That was 2006, right? I have written him a recommendation to have his record expunged. But then when your record is expunged, it still exists. So I have also written him recommendations for law school, to sit for the bar exam, to be accepted to the bar, because even though you can be approved to sit for the bar, they don't always accept you to the bar. And so this record follows him, and these challenges follow him for citizenship. And all of those things have happened, right? So he's now an attorney. He lives in Atlanta. He has 4 children. My husband and my children know his wife and him and his 4 children. We are friends. We see each other regularly. He gave me my dog that I have. I have a Mexican hairless dog. I have a Xolo, and it was a gift from Surrey. He is one of the single most important people in my life. And it's because of a relationship that started with a student who needed somebody to say, you need to meet this standard, but I think you can do it. Being willing to take a chance on them, commit to that, and then help them figure out how to do it. I didn't do any of the things for him. I just gave guidance. I don't think he'd mind that I mentioned that was him. I mean, I have a wonderful relationship with him. And I mean, I was recently traveling to Kentucky for something, and his wife and children drove through town because her family's from Canada, and they stopped and stayed with my husband and kids. Like we're that close, right? Like, and that started with an admissions decision that I couldn't make, and that has, and then every bar I set, he's met it, right? Like, and he did it on his own, and it was amazing. And it's so great to see. I have students who've struggled with addiction, who I have watched take 10 years to graduate from here, who I've had to tell them they have to leave here because they can't be here any longer, who I have had to help process because, medical withdrawals because they were in the hospital with, health. I mean, and you become invested, and you try not to become too personally invested, right? Because it's not healthy. But like, I also really want to see that student graduate, and he did a couple years ago. I have students who, I hooded a student this past commencement who was a 5th year senior, and he's smart enough. He just doesn't think he's smart enough, right? Like, you have a lot of those students. And he met with me every Friday for the last year. He came in, told me what he had going on in class. This isn't my job. It's not my job to do that. I'm not his advisor. I'm no longer a secondary advisor, right? Like, he wasn't even on probation anymore. There was no reason he had to do this. But when you realize that students need you, you do that sort of thing. And you can't do it for everybody because nobody has the capacity to do that, right? And I'm not doing anything that lots of other people on campus aren't doing. You just have your relationship to the ones that work with you. But I really believe in these ones. I believe in a very specific Randolph-Macon experience, and these are kind of extreme cases of that. But these students who can figure it out, and they just need scaffolding. I feel very strongly that you cannot do it for them. And there have been many times where I told the one I was meeting with every Friday, I was like, we're going to stop this process because I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for you. And if you're not going to take it seriously, it's not worth my time. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat that for you. And Wyatt knocks it out of the park. Like, and I just adored everything about it. And now he's applying for jobs places, and he graduated, and I'm so proud of him, and it's amazing. And I have a couple of those every year, right? And a lot of them, it starts because they have to meet with me because they've been suspended, or they're on probation for the 3rd time. I mean, I have a lot of those relationships with students, and some of them don't make it, and they don't do their end of the work, and then they haven't done their part. But the ones who are trying, I think it's important to meet them in that process as much as we can. I keep a copy of my own undergraduate transcript in my desk, and I share it with students regularly. I graduated college with a 2.5, which for academics is not high. A lot of your faculty members and folks like that were high achievers in college. And so I tell students I had D's. There are things that I didn't do right in my academic experience. I also worked 40 hours a week for a couple of years in school and did things like that. So, like, I understand that you have to work through not being perfect, right? Like, and I'm also telling you can come back from that. Like, it's possible. I think I'm doing pretty well for myself. And, you have a higher GPA than I did, sort of thing. We talk about what it means to withdraw from a course or from the college. I'm like, I withdrew from a course in college. You know who the only people who ever asked me about it? I only talk about it when I'm telling you it's okay to withdraw from a course in college because nobody's going to care. Like,
right.
literally the only time it comes up.
Yeah.
Don't do it, like, constantly.
Yeah.
Then that's a red flag. But if
Yeah.
you got to do it once or twice, like, it's okay.
Yeah.
Or I manage ADHD myself, and I have a child that manages ADHD, and I'm very open with that when I talk to students and with parents, because I get a lot of, well, you don't understand because my kid has this, or you don't understand, or he can't do this for himself, or she can't do this for themselves because they have this. And I'll say, actually, I do understand that because I've managed that myself, or, and this is how we can come back from that and how we can do these things. And I'm not telling you what works for me is going to work for you, or what works for my kid is going to work for you, but let's point you to A, disability services, and B, to thinking about how you can still get through things. Like, and so we talk about that. I'm pretty open with students. Because I think it helps them a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But my favorite thing about Randolph-Macon is that I think a lot of our students are smart enough to be at an elite institution, right? They're smart enough to do that. They have the brains to do that. But they don't necessarily have the academic background, or they didn't have the drive, or they don't know that they can be that person.
Yeah.
They don't see that in themselves. And I think that what we do here, what our faculty do every day in their classrooms, and what they do in their advising with students, and what is supported by the work in student affairs, and by the work in the HAC, and by the work in the library, and by the work in, I mean, Julie Hickman in financial aid meets with students constantly. Like, everywhere across campus, it supports that push to make them believe that they can do it. And I think the students we graduate from Randolph-Macon are stellar. I mean, they really are. And I have the privilege of having looked at on paper, the academic journey of every single student who has graduated from here since I've been the registrar. I read their record, often multiple times in the process, and I see the trend. Or I see the story play out. I see where they were in the wrong program and they figured it out and they've turned it around. I see where they were separated from the institution, or they left for a period of time and they came back, and they don't come back and are excellent right away, but they baby step into it and they figure it out, and they do it. I see the ones who are great from day one and they found another thing to be inspired by. Like, you can see it on the paper. You don't know the context, but you can see it play out. It is such a privilege to see that, and then to see them move on from here, and they do such incredible things, and it is so exciting to be part of that. And I think that's what we do here. That's why I'm engaged in retention. I don't care about retention in terms of the number. Like, I don't care what I care what our percentage is because I'm an administrator here, but I don't care about our percentage. I want to see students thriving here so that they can graduate from here and experience what it's like to be here, and that's the point of it. And I just love everything about that. And I think you can use the framework of the registrar's office, which is policy, to provide that scaffolding that they need to then work within it. Like, you don't eliminate that policy. You just use it to help structure how they respond to it, and thinking through it that way. That was a really long answer to that question.
That was beautiful. I feel like, gosh, anything we say now would just be anticlimactic, but that was a lovely description of your vision.
It is
and your
what
goal.
I will miss the most about here.
Yeah.
It is the Randolph-Macon student, what the Randolph-Macon student is, and I know that is really, there really isn't a single. It's a wide-ranging, it's a wide-ranging type of student, right? But that part where I think for most students who come here, that thing that clicks and then they go. I'm actually very much hoping my oldest son enrolls here in the next couple of years. I think it is a place where he would flourish, and I can see the relationships with faculty and with other folks on campus that would spark it. And I mean, it's exciting to me.
Well, you really articulate that beautifully. Wow, gosh, that is so nice. I did want to say, have us touch on one thing. Oral history often focuses on a period of crisis or conflict or a big watershed event. In Making Memories, we tried to just do a broad range, but I do want to talk about COVID, just because that has been what, for this generation and for just the world at this time, has been such a big a big watershed event. And so I just wanted to give you a chance to talk about COVID to the
It was
point
one of
that
the hardest things I've ever worked
Yes,
through.
yeah. to the affected, affected.
So I was co-chair of one of our response teams for COVID. I co-chaired the Rapid Academic Program Squad. We were named as squads, I don't know, with Rance Nicase, who was at the time the chair of the curriculum committee. He's actually back to being chair of the curriculum committee. But at the time he co-chaired that with me in his role as the chair of the curriculum committee. They didn't want to have a strictly administrative person doing academic response, but it really helped to have a person who saw all of the picture of that too. So we did it as a co-chair sort of thing. He is a member of our computer science department. We helped, and I mean, of course, through the appropriate governance structures, but I sit on the Committee on Academic Policies, which had to do a lot of our policy response. I drafted a lot of our policy response. When we decided to make the decision to switch from a 15-week semester from a 14-week semester to two 7-week semesters, thinking through why that was my first response to that was like, what? And then how we would make it work, working with Rance. Thank goodness he was a computer scientist, because we thought about how we would, because students were already registered for classes. I didn't want to change the schedule and make them re-register, because first of all, you have students who compete for seats, right, and things. You don't want them to lose those things. You have students. We wanted to create a schedule that would maximize students' ability to keep their schedule and minimize conflicts. So he developed a program where we looked for like different ways we could arrange schedules and reduce conflicts. We did work with faculty about how they wanted to teach, and then made some tweaks based on some things. Like if we found it would result in like 20 conflicts and 20 people would have to be dropped out of a class, we asked a faculty member to maybe make a shift. And then he did all of that automatically, and then he would sit on one Zoom screen and I would sit on another Zoom screen, and I would literally he would find errors and conflicts, and I would make tweaks to schedules and write the email to the students saying this is how we change this. And he would run different simulations, and I'd say, what if we change it to this? Or is there a way we can find a course that's gonna do this? And he would simulate it in like his thing, and we would figure out if it would work. I got to know him very well that summer.
And this was 2020.
This is the summer of 2020.
Right.
Yes, this is summer 2020. We also lost our admin assistant that summer. So Wendy Simpson had been our admin assistant, and right before COVID hit, she had applied for and received the job is support for counseling services. So her last day was like a week into COVID, working for us. And then we were supposed to be hiring, who is now in our office, Laura Story. But we're like, oh, COVID will be like a week, 2 weeks, blah, blah, blah. So we're like, we don't want to onboard you while we're all remote. So she ended up not coming on board yet. We didn't end up having her come on board. Thankfully, she still wanted to, until August. Wendy, because there wasn't a lot of remote work to do for counseling, helped us for a bit. But then she had shifted to being a 10-month employee by going to the counseling center. So I didn't have an admin assistant. And then when staff had to do the reduced workloads for COVID funding, Matt and Janice were both working at fewer than 100% hours. So I was processing transcripts from home. We were doing all of the schedule stuff from home. I had to confer degrees from home. I had to take all my files with my degree audits home. Like I had a whole office set up at home. And then I actually came back to the office pretty early because there was nobody in my building. Because it was just too much stuff. But we did all of that virtually. One thing that was a benefit is I had been really wanting to do a lot more electronic workflows. And so that forced us to doing it. Like I wanted an electronic withdrawal form, and so we had to just make one. And so it did force us to change some of our processes. We had already switched to a virtual record keeping system, which was fantastic because we were able to still access our records. So like there's like a folder for each student, right? And we used to store those as physical folders in our vault. Now they're virtual folders, but like the students' admissions material, correspondence about their academic standing, withdrawal forms that they submit, stuff like that all goes into this folder, and we keep it until they're 5 years after their last date of attendance. That's all in a cloud system now, so we could access that away. We could remote into Genzabar, but that's not cloud-based, so that our student information system was a challenge. I had to print on my home transcripts on my home printer. I mean, I literally had Scott Cully pre-meter envelopes for me on the meter. Take all of them home so I could print transcripts at home and then drop them into a public mailbox because the postage was already on them.
Yeah.
Like, that was how we managed stuff like that. But we kept a lot of those practices going, once we
you made some change, right?
once
Something's
we were
never
going,
come back.
which was really great. Our paper transcripts dropped dramatically. We'd already had the option for students to send electronic transcripts, and now we process, it has to be 98% of them are virtual or electronic transcripts now. Even though we'd had that before, now everybody just expects that. So that's different. Switching, we then had to manage the schedule in a way that was weird when we had hybrid and online courses, and then that took another year to kind of work through because that lasted a year. The 2020-2021 academic year was that mix of hybrid and online and in-person courses.
And the first semester was the only one we did the two short
7
terms.
weeks, yes.
But then we had those outdoor classrooms. Do you remember that whole thing?
Oh, so one of the other things I did with Rants is we had to assess the square footage of our classrooms, what the appropriate seat capacity would be, because we also had to cut seating capacity. We literally rearranged. We actually went to the classrooms and rearranged furniture. Like, we did all of these different things. We were like masking and rearranging furniture, putting capacity signs on doors. We used the fellowship hall of Duncan Memorial Church for some, and had to set that up and outfit it entirely. Yes, we had outdoor spaces. We had all of these different things that people could rotate through because we couldn't, because of social distancing. And that was also something that Rance and I managed. And then because there are not people here, because nobody was on campus yet that summer, and because my staff was reduced, like we didn't have full staffing, we actually did a lot of those, and like our physical plant might have been on reduced, like lots of people are on reduced staffing. We were actually doing, like we moved chairs. And laid out classrooms and did things like that. Looked at lab spaces, counted seats, all of that kind of stuff, to make that stuff work. And then like I said, the next year it was a combination of hybrid sort of things. And then we kind of shifted back to a more normal academic offerings. Now we have students who do ask about online courses, but we don't really offer. Our summer school is online, and that's the only thing that we've retained that way. Our students overwhelmingly preferred to be in the classroom. There are some vocal people who would like to have online options, but our student body overwhelmingly prefers to be in the classroom. And so that is thankfully who we are, and that will continue for the most part. But we had to deal with accessibility challenges and students not having great Wi-Fi, all the things that everybody's had to manage, right? And then of course the students coming in through that experience.
The students whose high school experience was that and it just aren't prepared for in the same way that students had been prepared for
students
college.
It is just a different world, and it's difficult to read that on a transcript, and the students don't even know that their preparation. It's not like they're doing poorly. It's just that everything is just a little bit different, and the anxieties. Mental health challenges among students have skyrocketed. That's become the biggest thing that I manage and facilitate withdrawal from students is navigating mental health challenges.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's across the board. That's not unique.
And we've always worked with that. But yes.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, I thank you for sharing those thoughts, and just remembering so many things, and in the library, moving furniture and putting up plexiglass, and we would check out materials and leave them outside in the foyer, and just all the things we did. But like you say, some changes we made have really taken, and we continue.
And some of it we just need. Sometimes you knew it was coming. Like you knew you needed. I knew we needed to have all these forms online, right?
Yes.
Like all these processes we could do online. But when you're in the moment, it's hard to just say, "But I need to take the time away to set this up." Like we were forced to. We didn't have a choice. And
Yeah.
so it just kind of forced our hand on a lot of that,
Yeah.
and it was good. We had also just made the decision to switch to an online. I actually implemented our online catalog from home. I did that whole implementation by myself instead of having an implementation team because we were at home, but we were able to do that, so it helped
Mm-hmm.
the catalog process. We also, that was the first year we were going to ship diplomas anyways, because commencement was going to shift.
Yes.
And so that worked out well too. I had
Yeah.
already had an arrangement with a company who was going to mail diplomas, and so some of the timing ended up being good.
Yeah.
I mean, as good as that can be.
Yeah.
I will also say I think we did really well. I think we navigated COVID really well here. At least on the academic side. I mean, and I think in a lot of ways, I think I really valued the working relationship that I ended up with Rance Nicase. We have really different working styles where I talk nonstop and he's virtually silent, and then everything in between. A lot, but we've ended up collaborating on a couple of really big projects here. We both participated heavily in the strategic resource allocation process that we did last summer. I was the chair of the data and logistics team, and he was the only faculty member of that team. And I don't know that I could have chaired that team had he not been on it. And we don't agree on everything either, and so it's good because it's a positive working relationship. And I think that anytime, I think we were really forced to do a lot of cross-office planning in both strategic resource allocation and in COVID. Everybody was, like, people working with student affairs and the business office and academic affairs and faculty, and like all these people having to work together to make these things work. As much as people are able to hold on to that and continue that in a post-COVID and a post-SRA capacity and maximize those relationships, we can really build on that. And I think that that's something that I feel like I've been able to do and that I've seen other folks be able to do. And I just hope folks don't kind of slip back into this is my office that takes care of this. Because we're all really serving the same goal.
Good. Well, I do want to ask you a couple of just specific things that I had notes here about. Preparing for commencement, and I know you have everything certified in all the categories and all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. But I wanted to talk about anything you wanted to say about that, but also about the laying of the bricks, which is a great tradition at Randolph Macon.
It is a thing that we do here. And it used to be like the bane of my existence. I'll be honest.
Okay.
So that process started right around the time I transitioned to the registrar's office. So, they went back and they laid a whole bunch of bricks historically, and I was not involved in that at all. But then, I think starting in 2006, they started laying them in time for that year's graduating seniors. And so we don't lay them in alphabetical order. And so you have to literally go out and check to make sure you have one for everybody.
Is there a reason they don't do it in order?
I think part of it is the way that they are packaged,
Oh.
but also then you can't tell who's missing.
Oh, yeah, that's nice. Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
and so they would put them down, and then we used to have the rule that you couldn't participate in commencement until everything was finished. You couldn't walk until you were. So they would put them down the week before commencement, and then once grades came in and we decided who was graduating or not, I'd have to go back out and tell them who to pull back up. So it was better to not have it be obvious, right?
Yeah.
But it also used to. We found out for years that we would send a list to physical plant, and then they would type it into the order form. So there were also a lot of misspellings on bricks. And so we would also be looking for that. It took forever for us to realize that's what they were doing, and then we started auto-populating it, and that killed the misspelling problem. But you're still looking for the bricks. So I go out every day, or every year, on the day that they put the bricks down, and, we order the bricks in January or February. So your graduation list changes. I have to pull people, not because they're graduating because they failed things, but because, we have fifth-year athletes who return, right? And they thought they were going to graduate back in January, but then they changed their mind in March. Yeah. And so their brick doesn't go down. I pull it and put it in my office and keep it for next year so we don't reorder another one. Yeah. We have a list of the ones sitting in my office. And then I bring them out the ones that were in my office. And we do check to make sure everybody has one. There's always a couple things that are not right.
Sure.
We had a student who misspelled his own name on his form this year, so we realized that was wrong.
You should have left it if he's the one who did it.
Well, we did, but their family noticed it and
Oh.
put it. I mean, I was going to reorder it anyways, but
yeah.
they noticed it and posted on Facebook. Of course, it's like the one family who posts something on Facebook, and we're like, well, he actually misspelled his own name. We didn't put that on Facebook. We
Yeah.
just noted them privately. But he did actually misspell his own name. So there's always a few like weird things like that, but we fixed that. And then, but I go out there with my checklist and make sure they're all there. And it is the president's single favorite thing that I think that I do here. It is President Lindgren's favorite thing that I do. And I think it's because the work of the registrar, and I can't speak for him, but I think it's because the work of the registrar is so nebulous and people don't really understand what we
Yes.
do. And that is a physical representation of what we do here.
Yeah.
So he comes out every year and he talks to me about all the students. He used to introduce me to people as the campus bricklayer. Like once I met Nina Totenberg when she was here to give a speech, like
Yeah.
from NPR,
Yeah.
and he introduced me to her as the campus bricklayer, and she was very confused. And I was like, well, I certified degrees, and there's bricks involved in that. And I'm like, plus I don't have the skilled labor that goes into the bricklaying part of things. But so I used to be like, why is this it? But then I realized it was really fun. Like he would come out and talk to me, and we would chat about some of the students that had been, kind of highlights in a wide range of ways.
Yes.
Students he would ask me about, students that I would say, well, I worked with this one for a long time, and it was really exciting. And then in the last couple of years, they've let me actually lay a couple of the bricks, and that's been really fun for me. I'll pick some students who I've worked with extensively or who maybe worked in my office, and I'll get to put their brick in. Or I'll put this year, I knew that my time at Randolph-Macon was coming to a close, but I hadn't announced it yet, so the brick guys didn't know. And they might still not know because they're contractors. But it's the same people. It's James Joyce and D-Rock. Every year I work with James Joyce and D-Rock to install bricks. But they let me do the whole last row this year, and I pounded them in, and I did it myself, and it's really exciting. But I think what really kind of made it seem less like a task, because it's hot. You're looking for names. They're not in alphabetical order. Like I got a million things to do the week of commencement, right? Like there's a part of it that feels like I don't have time for this. When you see students come up and get and they're finding their brick and they're so excited and they're showing their families and they're taking pictures with it, and it's really fun, and it's how they become part of Randolph-Macon. They become a permanent part of Randolph-Macon by having their name on that brick, and that's super cool. And I mean, it's been years since my mindset shifted on that. Truly. But it's really fun to be part of that process. And where my office is, where my desk is, my window, I face the fountain from my window. And I guess starting in about 2012, maybe they turned the corner to start coming up that sidewalk. And so for years, I've been able to see students coming up on the days, when they start arriving to campus before commencement, and they look at their bricks and stuff like that. And it's really fun to be part of that. I wish I had my own brick.
No.
But I didn't go here, so I can't.
Right. Well, I want to thank you. I'm going to give you a chance to say any final favorite story or memory, and then I want you to tell us what's next.
I have a lot of favorite memories. I've been really fortunate. Randolph-Macon's been really good to me in a range of ways. I've been able to join 2 trips abroad. I was a chaperone for Oisha Hilliard on a literature of Paris course. So Oisha and I flew to Paris and stayed with students for 2 weeks. She taught. I was the second person from Randolph-Macon to attend. And it was because I was on the study travel course committee. I approved travel courses. I helped manage them. I'd never been on one. I'd never been abroad. And it was helpful for me to know that process. I mean, that was an incredible experience. Yeah. And it was provided to me by the college. Yeah. A couple years in 2018, I joined a group of folks. Nancy Falciani-White from the library, the provost, some Tammy Reichel from Study Abroad. We traveled to Japan and got to visit 3 universities in Japan. I got to ask questions about what it was like to study there and do study abroad. It helped inform how I understand international curriculum. That's another thing that Oisha and I did in Paris is she took me into the Sorbonne. and like kind of pushed her way into some of the administrative offices so we could just ask them questions about how their credit system worked and things that we wanted to have answered. So my work benefited from those experiences as well. I mean, that was incredible. I have real personal relationships with people from here. You know, I told Annie I was going to tell this story, and then she, laughs at me. But when I interviewed for my job at Randolph-Macon, I was working at an art school. I worked with a bunch of artists. I mean, a lot of artists work at an art school. They are interesting, quirky people, right? And my husband is one. I love everything about that environment. And I came here and I met all the people in my interview, and I said, Trevor, I'm going to want the job, and I think the job will be fine, but I don't know if I'm going to be friends with any of the people in that office. Like, I don't think we have anything in common. I don't know what we're going to talk about. I just don't see any long-lasting friendships there, right? Well, I am foolish because a year later, Annie asked me to be the bridesmaid in her wedding, and our children are the same ages. Our two oldest are 16. My youngest and her second are 13. That wasn't intentional. It was a coincidence, but our children have grown up. She has a third. I don't have a third, but our children have grown up together. We have worked collaboratively together. She worked with transfer student admissions when I did transfer credit evaluations. So professionally, we've been able to work really closely together. And she's my closest friend. Like, I will miss seeing her here. We don't work that much together now. I will miss seeing her here. And I have relationships. I mean, I'm very close to folks like Lauren Bell and to Susan Parker. I have real friendships that I value tremendously, that I will take with me when I leave here. These are not people that I'm going to lose. But my relationships with faculty and with other staff colleagues, they're not quite as close as that, right? But I mean, I will genuinely miss, like, it makes me want to cry thinking about who I will miss working with and what I know about them and what I know about what makes them excited and what they bring to the classroom and what they bring to the institution. And I think about, I've been lucky to be on like 800 committees, it feels like, with Chaz Gowan. I love Chaz Gowan. I know how to work with him. I think he's tough on students in the best possible way, and he's somebody that I love working with students to get with him on academic advising. I think Scott London's perspective on how to think about curricular issues and to engage in new and creative things. Like, I wouldn't know that if I hadn't worked on these committees with him over that period of time. Like, all of these different people that you meet, and to see what they're bringing to the table is just so exciting and inspiring. And I will really miss the people at Randolph-Macon. I think that people, I think sometimes it sounds hokey when we say, we're all part of that, or I don't necessarily love the idea of family, because then I think it's hard to make hard decisions sometimes, but like stuff like that. But it's true. I think it is the people very much who are passionate about what they're doing who make this the place that it is. And I just think that's something that I value. Those are my favorite. My favorite stories are all person. They're all about people. Yeah. Whether it's my students and the ones that I've been able to watch over the years and that crack me up or that make me insane, or I don't know, like all of these different things. Or you see somebody on the street 10 years after they graduate and they're like, Mrs. Davis, is that you? And you're like, how do you even know who your registrar was? Like, really? Like who knows? I didn't know who the registrar was when I graduated from college. I didn't know what a registrar was. Stuff like that. I have parent, and I have very strong feelings about working with parents. They're not always my favorite population of people to work with, but I have parents who are like, it's been good to work with you, and I appreciate the work you did. And I like the people. I like the relationships, and that matters.
Well, that came across so much in everything that you've said. And as much as you're going to miss the people here, everyone here is going to miss you. But you are off to a new exciting role, and I do want to give you a chance to just tell us what's next for you. And,
so I am starting next week as the Associate Provost and University Registrar at the College of William & Mary. That is my alma mater, soon to be my second alma mater. And so it really is a place that it's the only other place other than here that I have wanted to work. I started taking infant swim lessons there as a baby. Like my mom took me, to like those 6-month-old classes where they just float you around in a pool. Ironically, the building that the registrar's office is in is below Memorial Hall, but that used to be a gymnasium, and that is where I took infant swim lessons. I took summer enrichment classes and like weekend enrichment classes through a gifted program there in the School of Education when I was in elementary school. I started taking German there in like the 3rd or 4th grade, I don't know, through like these special programs. Then my mom started working there when I was in middle school, I think, and retired, I think maybe 8 years ago now, but but retired from there, was there when I was a student, although in totally different worlds from the one she worked with graduate business students and I was an undergraduate student. But, was part of the community there. I mean, it's just been my sister worked there briefly in the business school as well. It's just been part of my life in some capacity or another. I was not a very typical student. It's not like I have that. I wasn't engaged in activities. I don't go back for homecoming. I don't know my faculty still. Like I don't have that relationship that a lot of alumni have with their institution. I worked a lot when I was a student. I juggled a lot of things, so I just wasn't as connected to the institution. It's more the through line in my life that it's part of. And registrar jobs don't open very often. So when somebody retires, I mean, the next person, currently me, who is in that role could be there for 20 years, right? 15 to 20 years. It could have been my only opportunity to apply for that position. And I was aware of that. I'm not leaving here because I feel really, it's very important to me that I tell like everybody that I talk to this. I'm not leaving here because I'm unhappy. It is the only other place I would have wanted to be. I really struggled with the decision to even apply for the job. Because I think the work I do here and the students I serve here is important. And that's different. It's different there. It's a different type of institution. The work will be different. But I'm really excited about it. I will oversee the registrar's office. I will oversee institutional accreditation and effectiveness. I will have a lot more than 4 people who report to me. I will be less involved in the day-to-day and the student experience. So it'll be a really different experience. But I'm really excited for it, and I'm excited. I think I said earlier, I love learning as much as I possibly can about everything, so it's a new place to do that. This will be the first time in years where I'm not the person with the answers to the questions.
Well, I bet you will be soon enough, but it sounds like a wonderful opportunity, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming today and talking
Absolutely.
with Making Memories.